This is Coffee and Conversations, episode number 1. And we have a pleasure to have here with us this guy here, Gary Orona. And he's a beast. What this guy does with film, photography, and even audio, lighting, it's amazing. And we're very excited to have you here in our first one because I do remember when I talked to you about the idea and you said, yes, let's do it.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, thank you. Thank you for
It's a
allowing me to.
pleasure. Thank you for being here and to help us out to set up the whole thing.
Oh, no problem.
But we're very excited because we have so many exciting people, very diverse subject that we're going to talk about. That's going to be for everybody to learn. And we want to do something very educational, very fun that we all going to learn. And we're going to be tuning to listen Coffee and Conversations by Sambalatte.
I remember when you first brought it up, and we had done podcasts in the past, and I thought, wow, what a perfect setting, because especially being in Las Vegas,
Right.
because you have such a diverse crowd that, like you said, that comes in the door, and so many stories and so many interesting
Right.
lifestyles and things. It's just the perfect fit.
Yeah, we're very fortunate because we have lots of people who are from Vegas
Right.
that comes to our doors here. And in 9 years, I have the privilege to meet so many great people and people that even became friends like you guys. And now you're here and you have done such a great job of helping us out to do our podcasting, to do our movie, and some great ideas that you give to us based on all your experience in movie and Hollywood.
Oh, it's our pleasure. You know, I have to say that we first started coming to Sambalatte, I don't know how many years ago it was, but my wife and I had moved some years back from Los Angeles, from the Hollywood world, to Utah. And we had done that because we wanted to spend a few years literally in the wilderness hunting for photography locations and filming locations for new art galleries that we were
Right,
putting
yeah.
together and whatnot. And so what would happen is we would literally spend, months and months in the wilderness, and then when we would come back to civilization, we would come back to Las Vegas. I have to tell you, one of the things that we craved, spending so much time away from civilization, was Sambalatte.
Wow, thank you.
And it was actually seriously, and I'm not just blowing smoke out here. We would literally get up in the mornings when we were here every morning and say, okay, we got to go to Sambalatte. That was the way the day started, and it was so refreshing given the fact that we had spent so much time in these crazy wild places where you could only dream of something like a Sambalatte. Right. So you were definitely a light at the end of the tunnel.
Let me tell you a story. We have a guest that comes here, and several years ago, he went on vacation for the holidays in Bahamas, and he was walking along the beach, and this lady said, "Do I know you?" And he said, "Maybe," and he said, "Where you from?" And said, "Las Vegas." "Oh, you're from Las Vegas." So where you go? And the lady started talking and say, "Do you go to Sambalatte?"
Oh, you're kidding.
And said, "Yes." "Oh, that's what I know you from Sambalatte in Bahamas." He said it was the funniest thing.
That's great.
And he said he comes here every weekend here. That they arrive with his family at the airport. They leave in Henderson, and they drove here to Boca Park just to have coffee.
Hey, I believe it, and I'm telling you, that with my wife and I, we would have driven anywhere in Vegas. It doesn't matter because you're such a connoisseur, and it's just true. Your coffee is so wonderful and so smooth, and look, we could talk about that for days and days. But when you had said, like I said, hey, I might want to do a podcast, I was like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'd be happy to help, set it up.
Yeah, the idea started several months ago, and with our guy who does our marketing, and he texted me, and I said, yeah, it sounds good, but I didn't click, and sudden I started thinking about, because there's a lot of podcasting out there. Some are great, some are good, some okay. And they said, we have to do something that's really great, something that people are going to say, wow, I really enjoy. And when I mentioned to you, and you say, okay, and you immediately you gave me a list.
Right. I
the
can't.
thing is to buy. He was like, okay,
Right. I don't.
he's serious.
I don't think Luis was ready for the list of gear I brought in and said, okay, you can. It was a long list, a little bit on the it's not that complicated, but but what a perfect setting. I mean, this we're in the Boca store right now, and it's such a wonderful, the atmosphere that you've created here is just fantastic. So it's my honor.
No,
to
thanks
be
for
here.
your help. So we want to know more about you, how you start on the movie industry, and how you end up in Hollywood. What are you doing today? Because you have so much excitement happening on your day to day.
Right. Well, you got about 20 hours. You can sit here and tell the whole story.
You make it quick.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. Well, I started when I was really young. When I was 11 years old, my mom.
Wow, I didn't.
Yeah, my mom bought me my first. She actually bought me a 35 millimeter film camera for photography, and she bought me a Super 8 movie camera, which actually spelt doom to a certain degree because now, for my entire career, I've been split between my love and passion of photography and fine art photography and my love and passion for filmmaking. So she started that when she bought me both of those
cool.
cameras at the same time. So I was one of these kids that was running around with a little Super 8 movie camera and filming stop motion. We would take our toys as kids and just create these goofy little animations and things like that. And then ended up going to film school in Hollywood, and the rest is history. Since then, I've created, produced, and directed hundreds and hundreds of projects. I've actually totally lost track. A lot of stuff with HBO for Cinemax. A lot of my stuff plays worldwide on HBO and then domestically on Cinemax. And I have. And so the bulk of my career for 30 years was really the filmmaking. A lot of television shows, a lot of television pilots and whatnot. I mean, hundreds, direct TV, pay-per-view, Showtime Australia. I mean, the list goes on. Lots and lots of
It's very
TV
extensive.
shows. Yeah, TV shows and movies. Lots of B movies in 2002. One of my independent movies that I co-wrote, produced, and directed. It won Best Picture at the New York International Independent Film Festival and the Los Angeles Film Festival. So I've done both film and television work for a long, long time. And then, like I said a second ago, I've sort of have this schizophrenia going, this dual personality, because I never lost my love of photography. So my roots are actually more in the photography, because I was first published when I was 19 years old, so it was pretty young. And I just never gave that up. I've always shot the photography along with the film productions. And then a few years ago, like I said, I'm actually winding the story down. It's not that long. But a few years ago, my wife and I, when we were in Utah, like I said, the idea behind us spending so much time in the wilderness is we were hunting for really crazy, wild locations that had never been photographed before in the American Southwest.
Yeah, you have some amazing photos and.
Thank you. Yeah, and so we opened up a couple of galleries there, and then some mini galleries in Colorado, and then we just recently opened up our first small showroom in Las Vegas. So now we have a photography showcase.
So where is your showrooms located in Las Vegas?
It's in the Arts District. So it's actually in the Arts Factory building, which is over on Charleston. It's actually kind of in the epicenter of the
Charleston and Main Street, right?
Yeah, Charleston, Maine. It's the actual building address is 107 East Charleston.
Okay.
And we're upstairs in the Warhol loft. So we're in number 290, and we set up a little showroom there for the photography so we can get some of the bigger pieces up for people to see. And we actually went to our first here in Vegas, every First Friday they have a big event called First Friday. And it's huge, and the entire Arts District is basically just attacked by mobs of people. I mean, it was so crowded, and we just had our first experience with the showroom open in the Arts District, and it was outstanding. I mean, it was for 5 hours, I guess it was standing room only. I mean, it was really packed full of people. So.
Okay. Another thing about it is nowadays, even we discussed the other day, the whole technology available for everybody can become a filmmaker.
Yes.
Everybody can become a producer.
Yes.
And but very few people have the eye for detail, like from the school that you come from.
Right, old school. I'm a classic now.
So, what your recommendation that you give for those out there that they want to learn and they want to develop their skills to be
As a photographer?
as a filmmaker?
Oh, as a filmmaker.
Yes.
Shoot. You know, the thing about now that we didn't have 30 years ago is we have Google, obviously. We have
Right.
Google, we have YouTube videos, we have all these things, which is literally like having, all of the knowledge of contemporary man sort of at your fingertips all the time. So back in the day, years ago, as a filmmaker, we didn't have that. So there were a lot of techniques and there were a lot of skills in the craft that took a long time to learn. You really had to earn it. Of course, back then we were shooting everything on film. So even the TV shows and projects that we were shooting was all on motion picture film, which is very different than shooting on digital video. Nowadays, young folks coming up, there's just a plethora of information out there. There's so many good tutorials out there, and what I get asked that question a lot, and I think probably the one thing I try to reinforce with people is I think people nowadays get really hung up on the gear. So even in the gallery the other night, multiple times I had some young people come up and say, well, what camera do you shoot on? And I think that
what kind of lens you have?
Yeah, what kind of camera do you shoot with? What's your system? Are you Canon? Are you
The
Nikon?
speed
Are you Sony? If when it comes to filming, are you shooting everything with Aeroflexes or are you shooting with Blackmagic design cameras? And it's easy to get overwhelmed. And I think that the one thing I try to tell explain to young people is that these sensors in all of these cameras nowadays, be it cinema-oriented digital cameras or be it still photography cameras, they're all good. In fact, there's only a few manufacturers that are manufacturing all of the sensors for all of the cameras. And so if you're a young aspiring filmmaker or young aspiring photographer, it really isn't these days it isn't the camera you're shooting, because you can buy a little $500 cheap Canon DSLR that's got an APS-C sensor in it and produce beautiful work if you know how to use it. So more than anything now, craft is more important than ever, because most all of these cameras are great, and so back in the day that wasn't so much the case
because of the film and
the size, sheer size. So real estate or the size of your sensor was surface area was, or film rather, was very important, because back in the day, so if you were, for instance, a still photographer, you had your choice: 35 millimeter, medium format, large format. In a large format, it could be 4x5, could be 5x7, could be 8x10. So the size of your negative back years ago was immensely important, because that dictated how big you could go with your prints, or whether you could shoot professionally as a filmmaker and get theatrical distribution. You actually exhibit theatrically, depended upon are you shooting 16 millimeter film, or are you shooting 35 millimeter film? Not so much the case anymore, because you can buy, I hope I'm not rambling too much here, but like I said, I could go on for days. But nowadays, you can get a little micro four thirds camera, like these little Lumix GH series cameras that produce beautiful. I mean, they're filmic. I mean, back in the day, the cameras that we were using when we were shooting movies,
big cameras.
Oh my gosh, they were big. They were huge. Oh, I owned for
and the
years.
Film,
Exactly.
You have to have the film.
Yeah, I owned an Aeroflex, a BL4, for years, which is a huge camera. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, I'll try to. It's probably the body of the camera is 12 by 12 inches, weighs probably 20 pounds.
Oh, it's big.
That's without the film magazine on. So you put the film magazine on, and if you put a 1,000-foot magazine, well, it's about 12 or 15 inches in diameter and probably 4 or 5 inches wide. With film in it, we add another 15, 20 pounds.
So how many minutes could you make a movie with 1,000?
Very good point. In fact, gosh, it's been so long now since I've shot, I'm forgetting what the times were. But if I remember right, a 400-foot reel of 35 millimeter film. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I don't even remember this. I want to say it's 3.5 minutes of film.
Wow.
So 1,000 foot was 10. Oh man, boy, I'm really testing my memory. It's been a long time since I shot film. But the point being that you had these giant magazines of film and you only got a few minutes out of them.
Right.
And then you got to reload. And reloading is a process. And you had to have assistant cameramen that went in and blew out the gate. There's a gate in there where the film is, being transported through. I mean, everything was analog. It was mechanical. Everything was
Labor
mechanical.
intensive.
Totally. I was shooting a movie one time, The Raven's Kiss, and we were shooting in the Dumont Dunes area, so out in the desert of California. We were shooting the end scene to the movie, and it was a death scene. So the wife of a husband who had come back to her was dying, and he was going to basically die on the top of this sand dune. So another one of my crazy locations. And as we went to film this scene, we needed to climb up to the top of this sand dune, and we were shooting everything on 35 millimeter film. And the day was very calm, no wind up until towards the end of the day. Well, about the time we started lugging, and I do mean lugging, all of our gear up to the top of this sand dune, the wind started to kick in, the weather hit. And the gear was so big and so heavy. I literally had 10 guys carrying heavy anvil cases full of gear, climbing
going up
the top of the sand dune. It looked like something, and now I'm going to really date myself, but it looked like something out of the movie Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, it was like literally like just this row of guys struggling to climb up the sand dune with all this heavy gear. Well, nowadays, with the gear we have, you could take up one small backpack, with a really good camera in it and get exactly the same quality, maybe even better quality.
Amazing.
Than what we had to go through back in the day to get that shot. So
now the production of the movies, because my wife and we love to watch old movies, black and white.
Right, that's great.
Because I think there is so much art,
Sure.
and a lot of things. There's a beauty that I think the new movies they use so much technology to create effect and
Sure.
things like that.
Sure.
And how do you classify the movies made in the old days with the new days that they put on a computer with a memory card and edit the movie?
Look, I think I don't want to paint the wrong picture. I love the current crop of cameras, post-production computers, editing software, After Effects. A lot of these programs we have that allow even the common man or woman to create their own CGI right at home. It's awesome. The power at our fingertips digitally to produce whatever your mind's eye sees is off the scale now. I mean, we dreamed about these days 25 years ago. However, that being said, I have a particular, I do miss, there's a little nostalgia involved here. I do miss the old days, the sort of organic texture of it all. And a lot of times the way I'll sort of describe my feeling is this way. And that is that if you're a lover of Westerns, old Wild West Westerns,
Yes.
they're sort of, you can kind of break it down to two sort of visual forms. So in America, in the U.S., most Westerns were very polished. So the John Wayne Westerns, John Ford, all of, Sam Peckinpah, the great masters of the Westerns, they were very polished Westerns. Now in Italy, there was a filmmaker named Sergio Leone. He did all the spaghetti Westerns. So he did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, for a few dollars more. They were the old Clint Eastwood Westerns, some of these. And they were very gritty. Like when you see the main characters in those stories, like they were sweating, they were dirty, they were just... And in the way they shot them often was without sound. They would actually record like a rough track, but then they would replace all of the audio. They would do what's called ADR, automatic dialogue replacement, and they would go in and replace the audio. So at the end of the day, those movies had a kind of a gritty, sort of unpolished texture to them. And so, and then there's the American ones that were very polished. And so I kind of see it that way, what you said. I see the old black and white classics as being, a lot of them were incredibly masterful, but there's this, because they were film, because they were analog, there's going to be some spots. There's going to be some dust in the film. There's going to be some grit in there, no matter what you do. And in our age, where everything is digital and very polished and everything, you can take all that completely out and be so polished that things look completely unreal. I tend to sort of gravitate towards the gritty. Like if I had to choose between the two forms of westerns, I would choose the spaghetti westerns. I just love that very real, earthy grit to them.
Okay.
So I think sometimes in the current digital productions, I kind of miss it a little bit. I think sometimes they just look too polished. You know, I have a hard time.
Lose the art.
Yeah, you know, there's something to be said for, and I like it with my photography too. It's the same thing. You know, I'll leave grain in. You know, a lot of guys are like, oh, let's pull the grain out. If it's grainy, it's not good, blah, blah, blah. And I think that, you know, even digital grain sometimes can look kind of cool. Like I like when things are more real and organic. They feel like they come from the earth. And I think that you know, if you think about music, for instance, so back in the day there was this time frame where Baroque, everybody knows the idea of Baroque. Well, what Baroque means is the unpolished pearl. So unlike other forms of music, I mean, it was a little bit, you know, is beautiful and stunning, but it was a little bit unpolished. It was edgy for its time, you know, and I kind of like that unpolished.
Okay.
Not too unpolished, but, you know, in terms of visuals, I like when you can feel the imperfections. Sometimes imperfections go a long way. And I think sometimes, kind of playing to what you said earlier about, you know, younger people coming up and wanting to learn how to become filmmakers and what to do, I think sometimes there's this sort of like giant marketing campaigns that all the major camera companies do, and it's like, oh, you have to have the newest camera, and it, you know, you have to have the highest resolution, you got to clean it up, there can be no grain and all these things. And I hope, you know, a lot of young people will realize that there's a time and place for all of it, you know, and you don't necessarily need to be so squeaky clean all the time. You know, allow some
Imperfections, some mistakes to show, and
yeah, sometimes imperfections make things absolutely perfect. I mean, I don't know if that
some
makes
stuff,
sense.
your
but-
imperfection, I cannot see it.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's
But
it
somebody
too.
else in the professional level, on your level, could look and say, "Wow, I can't believe he allowed that to happen."
Yeah, well, like the commercial. So we just shot a commercial for you for
Right.
Sambalatte that you'll use as you wish, and I'm sure that you and a lot of your employees and things that have seen the commercial, you know, like it. It's nice. It's very fast paced and all that. And we
I know
did
it's very exciting, very.
right, but see,
We love it.
but see, me as a you know, the director and as a filmmaker, I can see all the flaws. Like I know all the flaws now. Now I'll never give up where those flaws are. But I know where all that. We shot the whole thing in a day, and we're always, and it doesn't. It's not just that project. Every project, as a producer or director, you want more days. You just never really have them. You know.
Right.
So there's going to be imperfections and, you know, little flaws and little continuity issues and things like that. I see all of it. So it's hard as an artist. It's hard sometimes to let something out the door, because when I watch it, I'm probably seeing something entirely different than what you're watching or what somebody else is watching.
Yeah, completely different eye for.
Yeah.
So now, as you're a movie maker or filmmaker, do you prefer to make movie or commercials?
Ooh, wow. Loaded question. Both. I don't know that I could really decide that. Here's why. The reason is that commercials are really quick. You're going to shoot them usually in a few days, or 1, 2, 3, 4
Done.
days, and you're done. So it's kind of a quick thing. With a movie, you have to live with it for a long time. So if you're doing a low budget, I've done a lot of low budget independent films where they were shot in 10 to 20 days. So that's not a long time. But for instance, like when I've shot my HBO shows, it's generally 8 to 10 weeks. So that's much longer, and you're having to really live with it day in, day out a lot longer. And the editorial process, the editing process, takes a lot longer. So when you make a commitment, and then if you're doing a really big film, well, you might be living with that film for a year or two. So so look at it this way: if you're doing a bigger movie, you might spend your entire year or two just on that one project. So you better love it. You really need to love it. Now, with that said, it's more immersive. So when you really love it, you as an artist, you get into this sort of a tunnel vision, and it becomes you and you become it, and that's special. That's really special.
Mhm.
But it's also can be tedious and drive you a little nuts because you're literally living with this little baby that you have,
Mhm.
day in and day out
Yeah.
for so long. Whereas the commercials, you can sometimes be a little bit more rambunctious, and then you're kind of in and out of it really fast.
Right.
You know.
So all the movies that you have made, what's the movie that took the longest, have the most challenge
Oh boy.
to make? Because every movie is a different experience.
What would be which one took the longest? Well, when I did The Shaman, we did it over a very long period of time because it was a very visual piece,
Mhm.
and it was a sort of a very edgy topic. It was about a woman who was basically, existing in sort of this adult world where a lot of terrible things had happened, and she was sort of on a shamanic vision quest to break free and become liberated. And I hope that doesn't confuse people, but we shot that over a period of, it was over a year. And part of the reason for that is that we were self-funding. We weren't using any outside money. It was
Okay.
all our money. And so, because I'm a little bit of an insane filmmaker when it comes to locations, because I'm really, really strict about, I want the most authentic and real and vibrant locations I can do. So that film, for instance, required, we were all over the place, and we were in a lot of deep wilderness locations that were very, very hard to get to. So just the sheer logistics and effort of just getting to some of the locations before we even rolled a foot of film
Mhm.
was really difficult. And so that was probably the biggest. And ironically, that's one piece that it's very non-linear, and I wanted to do something completely avant-garde. So it doesn't have a traditional storyline to it. It doesn't have a traditional hero's arc, act 1, act 2, act 3 with, all the plot points in it. And so what that means is that it's, for some people, it's very hard to follow, and that's intentional. And so because we were doing such an avant-garde piece,
Okay.
it took a long time.
Okay.
There was a lot of suffering involved.
Is any style movie that you like to make? Adventure, humor, comedy, horror movie?
Yeah, I like thrillers. I've never really done like a pure horror, although we're prepping one right now. We're prepping like my first like absolutely pure genre, I've done a lot of exotica. That's kind of like, and people kind of focus on that a lot because I was offered, way back in the day, I was offered so many projects where I could shoot whatever I wanted to as long as it was exotica. I wouldn't call that my favorite, but I would say probably the genre, probably thrillers. I like thrillers the
Okay.
best, and anything adventurous or of the exotic. And what I mean by that is being able to shoot in exotic locations. I was as a kid, I was sort of infatuated with the great outdoors, wilderness, wild places. And so I was very fortunate that the projects I was shooting in my 20s, I kind of was given carte blanche by the studios to shoot a lot of whatever I wanted. And so what I would literally do is decide places I wanted to go to and spend a lot of time in and create stories and create projects around those stories and go there and shoot there, And so I've spent, like half a year filming in Hawaii, and I've spent a lot of time shooting in Cabo San Lucas. I've spent years and years filming in the American Southwest and wild locations, Indonesia. I shot a couple little B movies in Guatemala, which we were there for about 8 months or so total when we were shooting in Central America. So if there were places I wanted to go and be for a long time and experience, I would sort of create ideas around those locations.
Right, because you experience the environment.
So, which is much to the chagrin of sometimes my cast and crew, because sometimes, my cast and crew is either loving me and hugging me and saying thank you for giving me the best adventure of my entire life, or hating me and wanting to throw me in the lake. And
what am I doing here?
Yeah, I mean that happens.
I want to go home.
That happens so many times. So many times it was. But the funny thing about those instances, and look, I mean, I could write a book on all the experiences we've had, but the funny thing is that after so many years of shooting under so many difficult conditions and different stories and whatnot, what you learn a lot of psychology. You learn sort of how people work. So, with respect to the people that hated me for torturing them while we were filming, or loved me, here's the funny thing though, is that almost without exception, it's usually talent, because my crew, I use a lot of the same guys, and we're really dialed into each other. We love each other to death, and the guys and girls, and they're used to it. They're like, yeah, what adventure are we going to go shoot today, kind of a deal. So they're into it. But the talent, the actors, is very different. And a lot of the shows I've done have had revolving casts, like the HBO shows, so that there's a new set of actors for every episode. So they would show up to our locations sometimes not having no idea what they were getting themselves into. But here's the thing. Here's the takeaway. The takeaway is that without exception, and I can probably, of the hundreds and hundreds of instances, I can think of only one or two times where this was not the case. But for the most part, without exception, the actors that were screaming my name by the end of the shoot because the conditions were so difficult,
I want to go back again.
Yeah, I would bump into them years later at Christmas parties or whatever, and they would come up to me and hug me and say, "Oh my God, that was the best time ever. I've told that story 1,000 times." And underneath my breath, I'm thinking, "Oh, gee, thanks a lot."
They don't realize
while we were
later.
there, you were killing me. But then I think but I think more often than not, when we're in difficult situations, we're dialed into the fact, oh, I'm suffering, I'm cold, I'm hot, it's raining, it's snowing, whatever the situation is. And I think that what most people don't think about is the fact that it's through that suffering, it's through trial and suffering that the best stories of your life happen. Mm-hmm. And as a young filmmaker, young photographer, I learned very quickly that, look, I might be suffering right now. This might be, it might be 10 degrees outside, and I'm really not equipped, and I'm freezing my butt off here, okay? And I got to shoot all day long this way, right? But what I would mentally do, and still do to this day, is I remind myself of something, and that is that this is temporary. Mm-hmm. That my suffering, my physical suffering, is temporary. But what goes up on the big screen, if it's digital, video, film, whatever it is, that's forever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you got to sort of put the mental or the physical suffering away and learn how to not allow it to affect you and do your work. Right. Because at the end of the day, that's what when someone sees your movie or even you watch it or sees your photograph or whatever it is, they're not thinking, oh, that guy was freezing the whole time. They're saying, oh, wow, like I really like that, or I don't like that at all, know. So you kind of have to sort of remember that the suffering is temporary.
Another thing, as we right now inundated with so much media on the YouTube, Netflix, HBO, Hulu TV, Sling, and the list goes on. There is so much for us to watch. There's so much movies. And even I was telling a friend of mine the other day, maybe that's me, but I think the movies made in the past, which is not a lot, would make everybody so excited because it was so much fun. Or maybe nowadays, because we see so many movies. Yeah. Doesn't excite you anymore as they used to. What's your word on that?
Well, it's deep saturation, right? So I remember like Star Wars, the original Star Wars. So this would be 1977. I remember
watching the movie.
Yeah, as a teenager, I remember, and some of the effects and the matte paintings.
Oh,
it
was
used
amazing! Like wow!
Oh my gosh! But it was fresh, and they were using techniques that we weren't seeing, so it was unique.
Yeah, first time ever seeing those.
Right. So now, I think a lot of the we have been in little kids, little teeny 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds. By the time they're even 3 years old, they've already seen so many of these visual effects that I think it lose. Sometimes if your project is based upon visual effects, nowadays you're in trouble because it just doesn't have that wow effect that it had before. And I think more than ever, probably we need better stories. We need more compelling and interesting ways of telling stories that don't rely on the technology. The technology is there for us to use. If you can conceptualize it, you can pretty much do it with enough tenacity. But I think that nowadays, I think we're in an interesting time, and it's as a visual creator, if you will, as a person whose thing in this world is to create images and visuals. It's more challenging now than ever, I think, which is really weird because I remember 20, 25 years ago, like wishing I had some of the tools that we have now. But sometimes limitations are very powerful.
Because push your creativity to
Absolutely. And nowadays, where you have virtually no limitations. I mean, look, if you can pay $50 a month for an Adobe Creative Suite license, and you've got all of their software to use. So you have Photoshop, you got After Effects.
I have one of those.
Premiere. Yeah. And so if you take the time to learn those programs, well, you can do damn near anything. I mean, you can produce pretty much whatever you can think of.
Right.
Well, that's 20 years ago, completely unheard of. Like it would cost millions of dollars
to have those
to do
softwares
that.
and
Right. But as an artist, as a visual artist, it's really difficult nowadays. I think, at least I experience this, because the problem is that there are so many different ways that we can edit the same thing. So it's overwhelming. Whereas in the past, if you were shooting something, you had to if you wanted a certain look, you had to put a lot of different filters on the camera, and there were grads, and there were colored filters like corals, and then if you wanted it to be soft, you had to use like, Pro Mist or put a net on front of the, and so you had to really physically manipulate while you were shooting what your end result was going to be. Nowadays, you just shoot everything clean. You don't need to throw a lot of filters on front because you can do everything in post-production for the most part.
Right.
And so that sort of like list, if you will, of things you can do in terms of coloration, in terms of grading, in terms of CGI is like mind-blowing. Like the human brain can't even take in all the possibilities. There's no way. I mean, there's just no way. Whereas back in the day, we could sort of absorb all the possibilities. If I'm out shooting, 20 years ago, and I want a warm sunset kind of look, I'm going to throw some corals, which is a filter, by the way. It's called a coral filter. I'm going to throw some corals on front of the lens. There's like, okay, and if I needed to be bluer, I would throw, some, CTB or whatever it is. And it was kind of limiting, like, okay, well, we want it to look blue, we want it to look warm, we want it to look neutral. It was kind of like that. And nowadays it's like, well, we can take one part of the frame and make that look really gold, and then we can go really teal with this other part, and blah, blah, blah. And all these things are happening in post-production. Or do we want to go desaturated? Do we want to go sat? It's literally nuts what you can do. And I think that sometimes it's really, really overwhelming, especially if you're a visual artist who's been around for a little while and understands all the possibilities of visually what you can do, and you've got all these tools to do it all of a sudden. It's like you literally sometimes you kind of go into paralysis, because I'll sit in front of my computer sometimes and it's like, I don't know what to do because I can do everything. Isn't that weird? Yeah. But that's kind of where we're at right now. Is it's like, well, which do I choose from? I can't choose. I like this. I like this. I like
Too
this.
many
I like
choice.
this. I like this. Yeah, exactly. But you got to choose.
Right.
Eventually. So.
So with all these advancement, all these product that we can grab and to use, and to make a movie, to give a special effect on the movie. So what do you think what's going to be the future of the movie, the industry?
probably think it and it just happens. I mean, I can totally see at this point, especially with artificial intelligence, so AI, especially with, and it's just growing in leaps and bounds. And I think that what's going to start happening pretty soon is it's almost like you won't even have to touch a keyboard. It's going to be sort of, think it and it happens. Now that is mind-boggling to me, especially being at this point an old school filmmaker and photographer.
Lose the whole.
Yeah, because then you're even at a whole new level of, if I can think it, I can make it happen. And I don't know that I like that. And to be honest with you, I don't know that I really like that world very much. And I don't mean to be like sounding like I'm a Luddite, like I'm like some old fashioned, but it isn't that. It's that I recognize the strength and power of limitations. And I also recognize and understand that we need to leave some mystery in the world.
Right.
And that actually plays into like our experiences in the wilderness. Now, my wife and I have spent literally thousands of days, and that is honest. That is not exaggerated. In some of the
know for a fact.
Yeah, in some of the most remote, literally years of our life, in some of the most wild and untouched locations you can imagine. We literally would spend, an entire year of trekking out into the hills 5 or 6 days out of the week and not see another human being. I mean, that's how extreme that this is. And so I'm getting this is going to make sense in a second. But I recognize the fact that in that instance, we need wilderness. We need remote places that are a mystery. Because the problem is that, let's say, for instance, everything in the wilds, everything in the world is known. Every location is known. Everything that's at every location is known. There's no more mystery. And you can just Google and it's all there. Well, that curiosity mechanism in us and the sense of mystery and the sense of need to explore things and to find things and discover things is a huge part of what makes a human being a human being. And if we take that away, which is what we're starting to do,
won't be no more fun.
Where's the excitement?
Yes.
Where's the fun?
I agree.
I think that's partly why a lot of the younger, and I'm even talking, I don't know if the little kids are called millennials anymore. Maybe that's the ones past them, but I worry about them because I think that, even when you speak to a lot of them now, there's sort of like this
almost like a wall. They don't understand.
lack of excitement.
Yes.
And you can be talking about something that you're really excited about. Oh man, we walked underneath this waterfall and there was a petroglyph back there and this great and they're kind of like, oh, that's cool. There's no sense of like enthusiasm.
I agree with that.
And I think part of what it is that everything's at their fingertips. They don't
So
have
easy.
to go there. They just Google it and see a photo of it.
It's very interesting because I do remember several years ago, the guest was telling me here, people don't have to travel anymore.
Yeah.
And they say, why? They can watch a camera and they be in Paris, watch live in London and anywhere in the world. And I look at him and said, I'm sorry, but I want to be there.
Yeah, physically there,
Yes,
right?
I want to walk the streets. I want to see the people. I want to eat the food. I
Yeah.
want to, there is nothing like the real experience of life to be in the real place.
Oh, totally. And sometimes, because we've had people come out to our place when we had our place in Utah, for instance, who were urbanites. They've been in the city their whole life. And sometimes when you get them out there, especially younger people, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you would see this sort of fire light up. Now, it was hard on them. Look, I'm 54 years old now, and I can still climb mountains like there's no tomorrow. And a lot of these younger kids that come and, they walk 100 yards and they're going to die.
I'm so tired.
Yeah, they're going to die. And that's okay. I understand. You're not doing it every day. We do it every day, so it's no big deal. We could run up the mountain, but it's there's something in that sort of, or again, going back to the same words I use a lot, which is gritty, organic, very real experience that even though, you might be hot, you might be cold, you might be sweating, whatever, your muscles might be aching, that's where the magic is. When you take that away, you're taking away our humanity. We're not even humans anymore. We're just basically androids sitting there looking at a cell phone,
One thing for a fact, every time I want to go home to Rio, and I have to go place that I used to go, 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
I have to walk on the street because that bring me. I feel connect.
Yeah.
It makes I'm here.
Your roots.
Yes, and even I look at the photos, not the same as when I am there and watch the sunset at the beach in Rio.
Yeah.
And,
That's cool.
And see the people walking and people playing soccer or volleyball, all those things that really excite me to see it. For some people might not, but for me it does, because
Right.
that's how you rejuvenate your soul.
Absolutely. And that's important. We need to be refreshed, right?
Mhm.
We need to reconnect from the source from whence we come, right? The earth. Look, I'm not getting into religious stuff, but I'm just saying that, there's a source. Whatever you think the source is, you come from somewhere,
Right.
and I just get worried that I just see, and it's like, sometimes we would take people to incredible locations, and young people, and they're in this place that's off the scale beautiful, and they just can't get out of their, it's like an addiction. They can't get out of their smartphone, and it's like, dude, leave that
Disconnect.
at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful and it's so enlightening, and there's so much clarity and so much vibrance to find in these places. And I worry about that. And like I said before too, one of the biggest worries I have is that when you take away the mystery, when you take away that natural sense of curiosity, when they're just not even curious anymore because they can go to Google and punch up the answer, that's to me concerning. It's very concerning.
The other day, I was watching someone talking about social media, how our society being so addicted to the phone and being connected. And he was talking about, remember, your offline is different from your online world.
Right. Do you think
Wake
do you think they're having trouble separating the two? Because I think so.
Oh, yes. Because everybody have to look pretty. Everybody have to look great.
Sure.
Everybody have to post the great things they're doing, and that's what causing
And that's a
depression.
problem. And that's a problem now. I hate to be ranting on problems, but I do see that. Because, it's like, remember there was a song back, I think it was in the 80s, called Video Killed the Radio Star. Remember that? Video
Yes.
Killed the Radio Star.
Yeah.
Well, there's incredible meaning to that. And so at that particular point in time, it was like when MTV started. And before that, musical artists didn't necessarily have to be sexy physically. They didn't necessarily have to be anything physically. If you loved their music, you heard their music on the radio and you loved their music.
Right.
Well, when MTV happened, there was a paradigm shift in the paradigm, because now we're shooting a lot of music videos, and now we see the artist, and there are actually bands and artists whose career was destroyed when the videos all kicked in, because they weren't necessarily the prettiest physical people to look at in the world, and that's the truth.
Wow.
And that's scary, because now,
Rejection of society.
because of how you look, and it's so out of control now with these influencers and Instagram and YouTube and all this stuff. It's like, if you don't have like sex appeal to throw at it or something, it's like you can be brilliant. You could be a brilliant artist. You could be brilliant in science. You could be brilliant, like just a brilliant, intelligent, kind, loving human being. But if you're visually not, look, we're born how we're born. Some are born sort of physically more attractive than others. It's just kind of the luck of the draw, I guess. But now it's gotten to the point where, like, if you don't have the good looks to go with it,
That look and that.
like, it's a problem, and that's terrible. Think about some of the brilliant minds in schools right now, in elementary school, middle school, high school, who are being perhaps bullied. Maybe they got a big nose, maybe they got big ears, whatever. Yeah, right.
Big head.
And so they're being bullied, not because of their intelligence, but because of their physical attributes, right? And so because of that, they go inward, they become more introverted, and now they're not going to become more expressive in terms of their God-given
Socialize.
talents. Yeah, that's a bummer, because we're losing, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are magnificent, who need to be seen and heard, and we're not, because nobody wants to see them,
And
because they're not,
physical attractive.
yeah, they're not a model or something,
They're not well dressed and
Yeah, it's. I don't know how we got off on all that, but it's crazy. It's
But
really
going back now to photography here.
Okay.
Is he talking about the movie?
Circling back.
Photography has been always deep in my heart because
Cool.
nowadays we all have cameras. It's a much different world because now with your phone you can make some great movies. You can buy a great camcorder. There's the GoPro camera. There is so many options out there right now. Even the photography camera the DSLR can make movies.
Yeah.
So we have so much, but I think photography has always been one of my passions because it is an eye that you have that only the camera can capture.
Right. Right.
And the momentum there, and that how to say, when you look at photo, you can study and think about the moment.
Yes. Yes.
A movie is different because it take your mind all over the place because many things happening. But a photo, like, I think you do a great job on your photos, taking some great shots that I told you the other day, vibrant, very the color, the energy, the location, that people look and say, "Whoa."
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. That's funny you bring that up. There was a young girl, teenager, who came into the showroom the other night, and we got on this. I don't know how we got on this subject, but she asked me. She said something like, "Do you prefer, the videos and films, all that, or the photography?" And I said, "Well, I can't really answer that." I said, "But I would say if there was a gun to my head and I had to choose."
Mm-hmm.
It would probably be photography, and for similar reasons that you say, and the way I always explain it is this: is first of all, and this is going to sound silly, but think about it, it's very true. So to watch a movie, any movie, video ever, requires electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you need a monitor,
Right.
and you need electricity, right? You can't see it any other way. Okay, so a photograph doesn't require electricity, doesn't require monitor. You print it, you put it on the wall, and it lives. And so, in a weird way, and the other thing is that most people will watch a movie or video once and never watch it again.
Right.
Whereas if I have a beautiful image that I've produced or that purchased, and I put it, let's say I have a beautiful little breakfast nook. It's my favorite place to start my day, and I have my coffee or whatever it is, and I hang up that image on the wall. Well, that's something, if that image resonates with me and I'm connected to that image, that can change my day every single day. I can sit there and have my coffee or whatever, tea or whatever it is, and look at that image, and it can put me in a great mood day after day after day. But a video or a film, you're not going to turn on the TV. I mean,
how many times can you watch a movie?
Sure, exactly. But with a photograph,
how many times can you look at the picture?
Right. Oh, a lifetime.
Yes.
And see things you never saw before.
Mm-hmm.
There are a series of images I've been shooting over the last 30 years, which is ancient Native American rock art. So we've traveled to some incredible locations. We've even discovered spots that we're pretty sure have never been seen by modern man. But the reason I bring this up is that in some of these sites that we photograph with the ancient Native American, the detail is insane. And I have pieces I have shot to this day that I will look at, and I print them very large, so they'll be maybe 6 feet wide. That when I looked at the and I've seen these images 100 times, and I've worked on them, I've seen them, I was there, I shot the photograph. To this day, I have one that is hanging over my work area in my study, and every once in a while, I'll just sit there for a few minutes and just stare at this. And to this day, I will find details and see things in it that I'd never seen before. Yeah, and
it's amazing.
Yeah, and it literally is sort of like ghosts or spirits from the ancient ones, like re-emerging every time I look at this piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that, and it goes for any kind. It doesn't have to be an American rock. It doesn't have to be a rock art piece, but it could be any landscape or any piece that you just don't. But with a photograph, you can sit there and study it, and then all of a sudden something pops.
Because I think the photo connect with your brain, with your visual, and with your heart, and so that it makes you memorize and remember the moment. Sometimes that you shoot the photo, or maybe you are in the photo and remember those moments.
Right.
It's a very, very special.
Yeah. Well, I found too that one of the secrets to helping people really love photography is I talk to them. Like I'll see somebody maybe they're at the other end of the gallery, especially at our Utah gallery because it was a very large gallery. And I would see people at the other end of the gallery and sitting there and staring for a few minutes. And I'd give them their time. And then after a little bit, I'd go up and introduce myself. And when you talk to them and you share the experience of producing the image, more often than not, it creates connections because we're at the end of the day, we all have very similar, needs, wants, desires, all those things. And so when you just talk to someone about, why you shot it, the conditions, maybe I had to go back to the place 20 times before the weather was right, whatever the situation is, and they can kind of connect to it, that's when people come alive. That's actually usually about the time that they'll end up wanting to purchase something that they had no intention of purchasing when they first walked in the door. But when there's a connection to it, that's where the power happens. And it does happen. It happens all the time. I've got quite a few pieces I've shot that are in locations that quite probably have never been photographed before, or at least never been photographed by a professional photographer. So, those pieces, and I'll talk to them about that, and they'll realize sometimes the viewer that they're seeing something that's insanely rare, like that's so very few people will ever see. And I think it makes you feel special. It's like
One thing I can say when I look at your portfolio of photography, that the pictures that you have is so unique, that because I know that you go to those places.
right.
Otherwise, some people can think, I think it's a paint.
Oh, yeah, I get some people thinking they're paintings. Sometimes I'll get people who, look, to each his own, right? Everybody has, even in any kind of art, even in oil paintings or whatever, certain styles appeal to certain people. Some people like realism, some people like impressionism, some people like surrealism, abstracts, whatever it is. And, at this particular moment in time, a lot of my images are very saturated, very colorful, and very contrasty. Now, it's a choice. And I could easily create photographic pieces that are very pastel and very subtle and sort of lack strong moods, that are more sort of ethereal. I don't really choose to do that right now, but it's a conscious decision. And so when you talk about, you see the library and that there's something there, I can tell you what's happening. So what's happening is that when I go to I've been to so many locations, wild locations in my life, I think I see a little bit differently now. And I think I see differently than I did 20 or 30 years ago. Because what I've learned is that we as humans, our mind and the filters that are on our mind get in the way a lot. And that's one of the young photographers, and I'm trying to teach them. One of the things I tell them, which completely baffles them immediately, is I say, learn to see. And they don't understand what I'm saying. And what I mean by that is that, our human mind is very limited, and we have filters, strong filters. And what we'll also do is, let's say, for instance, I'm in a location where there's a red barn, big red barn, okay? Or, big, beautiful tree or something. Okay, we'll go with the red barn. So, big red barn. And I stand there and I see this red barn and I think, oh my God, that's the most beautiful red barn I've ever seen. And so you get your camera and you get out and you take a picture of it. And then you go home and you're really excited to share it with all your family and friends. I went on this great trip and there was this red barn that was incredible. And so you pull it up on your phone or whatever and you look at the picture and it looks nothing like you saw when you were there.
Right.
And there's like telephone poles going through it and there's a bunch of junky trash all over, but you didn't see it when you were there.
Right.
It's very common. So that's why tourist typical vacation photos are terrible. And when you're showing them to your friends and family, it's like, they didn't look like that when I was there. You want to know why? Because when you're standing in anywhere you are, so I'm standing there and I'm looking at that red barn and I say, I got to get a picture of this. What's happening is your mind, your brain, remembers subconsciously every single photograph or image you've ever seen of a red barn. Okay?
Right.
Some of them are probably magnificent. And it's blending that into what you're experiencing as you're physically there seeing
So the
it.
moment they don't see the barriers
Yes.
that they have on the photo.
Yeah, you're not really seeing what's really in front of you. Now I know this sounds really weird, but it takes a long time to learn how to truly see. It takes a long time to learn to see what you're seeing. And again, I know that sounds bizarre, but it's totally true. And we all do it. And that's why so many people think their photograph looks great, but that when you look at it, you're like, that's not so great. You know, that's kind of a not a good photograph. It's because that's what's going on. It's because our brain gets in the way.
Right.
And so what I do when I'm producing some of the bigger scale pieces is I've learned, I mean, I'll sit up there for hours. If I'm on the top of a canyon and the sun's starting to set or whatever, I'll sit there and I really, it's almost like I go into almost like a meditation. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you have to retune and take away, you know, all of the and I call it TMI, and my wife, she's over there probably laughing right now. I say, oh, TMI. What TMI is, too much information. So one of the most common problems with most photographs is there's just too much information. Mm-hmm. They're not focused on one thing that's powerful in the photograph. So I try to find that one thing that's, I call it the singularity, you know, the one thing that's really powerful. Find that, and then find what's wrapped around it, and then, you know, come up with a way to evoke that emotion. So it is a process.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Have you ever taken pictures in a safari in Africa?
I haven't.
You haven't?
I know it sounds ridiculous. Like I so should have, right? Like, what are you talking? You're a photographer? You've never done Africa? Nah, a lot of other places, but not there. And I think probably mostly in, God, I'd love to. And I may one day, but I've never been a wildlife photographer per se, and so I think I sort of have put that on a back burner, thinking, well,
I watch some of these, very difficult. Sometimes days to take one photo.
Well, even what we do, like for instance, you know, I have some pretty epic pieces that literally people walk in the gallery and their jaw drops, right? Like I've got one piece called The Original Garden of Eden #2 is one of my pieces. It's like that. I have another one called Alone, which Color, which is a company owned by GoPro, chose in 2016 as one of the world's best panoramic images. They put it in their book, but it's called Alone, and that's one like it too. But you know, those pieces required a lot. I mean, tremendous effort and tremendous visualization, and so, actually, I forgot what the original question was. I went off on a tangent
About Africa.
No, yeah, the African thing. Yeah, So yeah, I've just never really, you know, you talk about, I remember what it was. So you'd said, well, it takes them days and days sometimes to get one shot. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I have kind of figured out what my average is for a landscape. I'm not even talking about an elephant. You know, a landscape typically takes about 10 days.
Wow.
Of adventuring and trekking and hiking,
the lighting,
and everything.
Time of the day,
about
weather.
1 in 10. I would say about 1 in 10 days is when I really get one. What I call a master image. Now I got a lot of images that are really nice, and
the one you like the most.
They're good for decor or whatever. But the ones that really are a masterpiece, the ones that really resonate, it takes probably about 1 in 10 days is when I finally nail one. Okay. So yeah, there's a huge amount of effort involved.
Right.
And a lot of suffering too.
So I really appreciate you coming over here today, and it's been a pleasure. I have learned a lot. Just listening, you know, some information that I never heard about, movie, photography, and the same. I hope everybody's learned as well, because such a very unique, you know what I mean, to hear a movie maker, because sometimes there's lots of movie maker photographer. You watch it on National Geographic, but it's a very generic. I mean, they're not going in details of the day-to-day like you're going through.
Right.
But I really appreciate your time, and just to finalize here, what is exciting that you have coming up on the movie world and the photography world?
Right. Well, in the photography world is obvious. We just opened the new space over in the Arts District, like I said before. By the way, the website, if people want to go to, is savageterritory.com. So the word savage and the word territory, treated as one word.com. And I have a huge library.
Yeah, we'll make
there.
sure that we add on the
cool.
on the
Yeah,
movie, yes,
thank you. Yeah, and so that's really exciting, because now we're in a bigger market, a Las Vegas. We're very excited for the first Fridays of every month. We're going to be there. I and my wife will be there every First Friday. We'll make sure we're there to meet people and talk to people and all of that for that. So that's really cool. And then on the movie front, I'm developing a little horror film right now. It's kind of a traditional, more of a typical horror film. It's not one of my crazy pieces. It's all non-linear and all that. And interestingly enough, it has to do with influencers and sort of social media influencers are sort of the centerpiece of this one. So I don't want to say any more because I don't want to give away the plot line, but we're developing that, and hopefully end of September, early October, I think we'll be shooting. We'll start principal photography on that.
Okay,
one.
cool.
So,
But we want to thank you very much for coming in, and of course, this is our first episode, and many more to come.
Yes.
And we truly appreciate all your help, your assistance to be here with us today, and continue. Many more that for everybody to watch, and I think we're gonna make everybody gonna enjoy very much all the episodes that we're gonna have here.
well, thank you too, and keep making that magnificent coffee. Because, like I said,
we're
when we
gonna
would
try.
when we would come out of the wilderness, we go straight to Sambalatte.
Maybe we should take a little coffee maker so you can make.
Yeah, I know. You got to set me up with that. Come on.
But again,
Wilderness Sambalatte.
Thank you very much. This was Coffee and Conversations by Sambalatte. Thanks for watching.